G'day friends and fans, and welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 11th of August 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The ProWritingAid, Power Games, Into the Elsmound, and Erotic Tales from the Empire. Part 1 available now. All my links are in my link tree. Scan the QR code to get my link tree. You get the links to all my books, Patreon, social media, merch. Thank you to all those who support the channel. You can support the channel through all the links in my link tree. Now, while the media bangs on what a bad guy Putin is, you know, Putin invaded! Putin invaded, I tell you! Putin's the bad guy! You know, all the hysterics from the hyperbolic far left. You know, and of course, Trump's a Putin puppet. You know, they keep up that lie because, you know, no matter how much you throw facts in the face of the left, they're autistic. You know, they don't learn facts. They're indoctrinated. They want to tell you how stunning and brave they are. Of course, you know. Never mind. Maybe Putin's a bad guy. But you know what? You're not Russian. You're not Chinese. You're not North Korean. If we go around selecting the leaders of other countries, you know what's going to happen? Eventually, other countries are going to start selecting our leaders. You wouldn't like that. It's like all these Indians who cry about colonialism. And everybody's going, well, when are you going home? The world's full of hypocrites, my friends, and you know that. You know damn well by now, Zelensky's not a good guy either. Okay? I think the majority of Americans have spoken and said they don't like either. But a number of Americans have said, you know what? You provoked Russia for how far too long? Since 2014, Ukraine has provoked Russia. Zelensky's in a long line of evil people who've ruled Ukraine. Ukraine has hardly anything to be proud of. Yes, he may be the least worst, but he's only fighting so that he can join the EU and put himself on the EU gravy train. This man is not fighting for his people. He's a bunker croach, okay? He's a cockroach in a bunker somewhere in Poland. He flies in with CNN. He's guarded by the British Secret Service. His head of Secret Service goes around murdering people, such as the recent attack in Spain on the leader of the opposition of Ukraine. Ukrainian opposition has to hide in other countries. And when it was revealed that Spanish intelligence may have aided Ukrainian intelligence, claiming they were hunting Russian agents, it all got hushed up, all got washed on the table. Ukraine is not our friend. They're not our ally. They're that bum you met one day in the pub who every time you see him is always forgot his wallet. You know, he's the guy who's always reaching in a pocket and saying, oh, you got a tenner for a pie, love? You know, always put his money in his pocket. Never money in his pocket, of course. He's always wanting you to put your money in his pocket. It's got nothing to offer. It's like that thought, you know, you're swiping through Tinder and she says, I'm 37. I got 16 kids with different deities. I need you to buy me KFC, pay my rent, pay me electricity, make my car payments. And you say, love, what do you bring to the table? She says, me and my kids. That's Ukraine. Ukraine's a thought. Ukraine's that thought on Tinder. As well past a use by date. And lo and behold, Russia's saying, we're not giving up our territory, and Ukraine's saying, we're not going to accept any peace deal that gives up territory. So how's there going to be a peace deal? Is Putin going to fool Trump? No. Zelensky is that asshole who stands behind you and says, he called me mean names, beat him up for me. That's who Zelensky is. He's that girl in high school goes around provoking fights, getting a boyfriend to beat people up. Well, he looked at me funny. Beat him up for me, Daddy Trump. And you know if Kamala was in office, she'd go, yeah, we got to get Putin. We got to bend him around and beat him up, and we got to break up Russia so we can feel good about ourselves again. You know what makes you feel good? You know what costs less? Do you know landing on the moon would cost less than this war right now? You look at it. You go back and look. But of course, what happened? Well, all these moon landing conspiracy theorists are saying, we can't land on the moon because we ain't got the data. And it never existed. Obama destroyed all the data. Okay? Instead of preserving the data, he had NASA make Muslim meals for space travel. I'm not making this shit up. You can look it up. All the punch cards, instead of being archived and preserved, were burnt. Destroyed. It took a decade to create all the data necessary so a computer could remote fly. They had this weird thing, a TV program that showed you how they did it all, where they called a documentary. There are 5 official space agencies around the world. 3 of them hate our guts, but they actually released photos of the moon landing and admitted all along they watched the moon landing and knew all along that America landed on the moon. But they said this is the problem with freedom, okay? People think they have the freedom to slander, to smear, to lie. And because so many people do it, there's no consequence for the vast majority of liars, smear addicts. But the First Amendment should not protect the media from lying. And as we've seen, up until Trump, hardly anybody successfully sued the media. Most cases go nowhere. And now you have a panic in the media. Donald Trump has said, don't hold your breath. There ain't going to be no fucking miracles. We're going to sit. He's going to present his case to Putin. Okay? Apparently Zelensky has been invited. All that Putin said is he's not going to directly talk to Zelensky. He never said he wasn't going to talk to Zelensky. He said he was never directly going to talk to Zelensky. That's a massive difference. But to the media, nah, bro, we got to make stuff up. We got clickbait to sell. And you know what? You may not like the news, but I'm bringing you the truth. I bring you receipts. Plus, you ain't giving these Muppets click. Okay? I go through all the clicks and the clickbait so I can bring you the most relevant information of the day so you can sit back and say, well, at least I didn't give them my clicks. And maybe, I know media outlets are dying. Everybody knows, I think, media outlets are dying. But while we do need a variety of media, we don't have it. What we have is AP, Reuters, and a couple of other smaller independent agencies. And what most people don't understand is the difference between a newsroom and a news agency. And most of your newsrooms get a variety of sources from AP, Reuters, British intelligence, CIA, etc. All pump information into those agencies. And they do for millions of dollars what I do for a few thousand a year. Yeah, I have costs still, but they aren't much. I need a new microphone. I need new headphones every few months. They wear out quickly. I need a new computer every few years because they wear out quickly. They're not made to last. But media keeps telling you how they got all these lawyers and sources. Yeah, what are they, flying saucers? Because they're lying saucers, that's for sure. But we have this bullshit about a seasoned Ukrainian serviceman saying, there won't be any ceasefire. Putin believes that he'll last until this winter and that Ukraine is going to win with massive drone attacks on Russia. All you're doing is provoking Russia, okay? Every drone attack Russia has actually a simple pattern. You attack Russia, every few days they attack back. Isn't that fucking amazing? The whole key to this war is, so far, no massive air attack. There was some incident with a Belarusian up here, but you can see outside of the battlefield, which, Russian shelling, gives you some idea that Russians can engage in artillery shelling beyond what they claim, okay? Clearly, Russia has artillery with a range. Isn't that amazing? They have a 153, which is their mainstay cannon, but they also have a 203, which is, I think, the Mutt Beta S, which I think is a 203. It's a mortar-style artillery. And they have the, don't ask me to pronounce it, but it's the 170 millimeter. And it's a 170 millimeter, I think is 37 miles, although some say further, but that's obviously rocket assisted. Hence, I said, most of this, and you can see the Russians have made breakthroughs. They've broken through the Ukrainian lines again. Now, yes, there is rocket artillery on both sides as well. Again, most of that is the same, right? 122s. And believe it or not, Ukraine has actually bragged how they too get 122 millimeter rockets from North Korea. Well, they stopped bragging about that last year. But yeah, last year they were all bragging about how they were getting, we stole Russian rockets. And then it turns out, no, you didn't. A Spanish ship intercepted 122 millimeter rockets bound for Turkey and rediverted them to, they were bound for Turkey. But since then, and then they admitted that the Turks said no, they were bought and paid for and bound for Ukraine. So the Spanish shipping, they lie all the time, right? They always want to pound their chest and tell them what good little heroes they are. But in reality, none of them really put their lives at risk. And they always want somebody else to pay the price. It's the problem with socialism, man. It's a rot. It's a brain rot. It appeals to the lazy and the low IQ. But you can see Russia's opening up multiple fronts, stretching Ukraine's resources, but not as many as they've had previously. That's a fact. Okay, I think the most was 152. The average amount of engagements is 146. But somebody said the other day there was 172 once. That was in the beginning of the war, but statistically, that was an anomaly. It probably was probably in the initial phases, you know, when reports coming in, you had less filtering than they do now. But the number of news stories is clear. They count every engagement for that day. So these dots could also be multiple engagements on the same day. But there are multiple engagements without advance here in Kupiansk. Most of the map north rarely moves. A little bit per day here has occurred, which is not much on the grand scheme of things, but still, Russia's growing while Ukraine is shrinking. Though there's that little spot here where the Ukrainians seem to be well dug in, or well ignored, really, low priority, okay? Russians are operating on a very tight list of targets, and by tight I mean very few know the exact targets and the where and whens. And battlefield commanders are given their priorities, usually in coded coordinates. But as you can see, every so often Russia makes a minor advance here and there. Sometimes you have to zoom in, but there's areas where they've absolutely stalled, no doubt. Okay? They were up until Zelesnky, but then they dug in here and since the end of winter last year, they've just been dug in there. The winter campaign wasn't as successful as Russia had hoped, but it was still somewhat successful. And they're still fighting in this forested area, I think. But of course, it keeps the Ukrainians busy, doesn't it? And as you can see, the front line is moving up little bits at a time. Now they're run into a village here, I think. Yeah, they're on the outskirts. Sorry, not the village. They're on the outskirts of the town. Shows you how quickly, right? They quickly moved up on this target. They've made huge headways in a short time. But still, there are damn ads, right? They were back here, you know. This was down here, right? There's been some advance here, not much. Still, there's this gap, this little bit here where the Ukrainians are holding out. The Russians are closing in on cutting all this off. Still fighting here. They haven't advanced, but they've made a breakthrough here, and they're attacking the Ukrainians here, fending off their flanks, and still sieging here. They're pushing through to close this, to basically open up more territory, cut this road. So it allows Ukrainians to keep coming into here. Well, it won't entirely. Usually the Ukrainians come over fields, not doubt, but it enables more artillery to be brought up, because basically this is crumbling. So far, they haven't crossed the line, but they're fighting along the line. But they've crossed the line, crossed the line here, but they've crossed the line here and seem to be fighting up in two-pronged attack. We've got still multiple. We've got some advances here, multiple fighting along the front. And it seems again here the Russian army is going in piecemeal, just sweeping westward. Now and again there's encountering enough resistance to slow them down. But every few days they advance. But very little, very little. Like, minuscule. But everything adds up, and a month later you suddenly realise that they have advanced. And then when you do the timeline, you can actually see where it goes. Doink, 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 doink. It's the same here. Yeah, back and look. This. Now they've taken this flank, and now they've moved up on this town. You know, when they can't take one line, look at this. Look, I don't say they'll surge up here to put all this under pressure. And this will slowly crumble because they just have to decide, 500, 500, 500, or bring men up and try to stop the Russians here in a line. I still think, is it Colonel McGregor? I think it's Colonel McGregor is right. And if Ukraine could have stalled the Russian army through the winter for 6 months, it would have been over. They could have gotten a reasonable deal and lost only 15%. Then 6 months later, that was 2 years ago. And then a year ago it was 20%. And now they're looking at losing 25%. But Zelensky somehow thinks that he can get himself in a winning position just by constantly destroying the Russian economy. Saying, oh, look, the Russian economy isn't advancing. Just put more pressure on Russia. You think this is a game, like Call of Duty. I just keep respawning. Oh, eventually, but you think the other guy, he killed me 50 times, but I killed him once, so I'm the winner. Because you're the liar. Because you killed him and captured the flag. You think you won? No. That's plot armor, right? And right now, Zelensky's got plot armor, and like I said, they are pushing. Donald Tusk has said, nah, bro, we're not going to recognise a peace deal. We can't allow Russia to emerge from this war even stronger. But it cannot be discussed without Ukraine. No, nobody said Ukraine wasn't included. Right? It's just Trump and Russia sitting down to work out how they are going to proceed. And basically, because ultimately, right, you got Europe always trying to undermine the US, all right? Europe always trying to push this war, and the US is saying, no, look, we're going to make peace with Russia, and if you don't like it, go fuck yourself. I mean, what's Poland going to do? Declare war on Russia? That's it, they're fucked. But of course, that's what everybody wants, right? They want one of these hotheads like Tusk or Zelensky. Not Zelensky, but Tusk, or what's the other fucking muppet? Well, there is choice, right? Stammer. I don't think Stammer's got the guts. He's all bark. I think Tusk suddenly thinks that all of Europe is going to suddenly swarm. They're going to steam through to Moscow. We're going to destroy the Russians so they're weak. So why? So we can feel safe. Yeah, but if you didn't provoke them, you had détente. You had them in a weak position, and you still didn't. You still provoked them because you are the bully, right? This happens with every victim. Victims become bullies. So if you go around victimizing somebody, one day they become a bully. And then you cry, and then you go, oh, what went wrong? He was such a good boy. That's the problem. Everybody wants a good boy they can pat in the head and say, go make my car payments. Now go get me groceries. I need my nails done. I need my hair, right? This is Poland. Poland's acting like a fucking twat. And when one day the guy says, no, they go off the rails. So you're an evil man. You're an evil dictator. You know? You're mean to me. You won't give me my essentials. I just want $400 in brand name groceries. Once you figure out the pattern of behaviour, sure, we got no right to choose the leader of Poland, but we don't have to support them. This is what's the problem with making treaties. What happens when you get an arsehole who starts creating war? But J.D. Vance has said, you know what? Fuck him. Okay? You want this war? Step up. But we're not going to fund it ourselves anymore, he said. You want to buy the weapons? That's fine. You want to give weapons to Ukraine? That's fine. But we're not going to fund it. Now, there was territorial swapping. There was not actually... Now, I do believe this was actually talked. The actual discussions were whether basically trying to get Russia to give up territories outside of the disputed territories, right? That Russia would draw from in the north and Ukraine would withdraw in the north. And then there would be a ceasefire along the line of contention in the east of Ukraine. 30-day ceasefire, which sit down and work out the talking points. See, this is the problem. The media makes it out that one meeting's going to solve everything and that the whole problem will go away as soon as you just get rid of Putin and Russia withdraws from Ukraine. Here's the problem, folks. What's going to happen to the ethnic Russians in Ukraine? Zelensky's going to murder them, like he did to the 100,000 plus in Western Ukraine, along with Poles and Poland and Hungary. Used to ask many questions because nobody wants to ask these questions. Nobody wants to own up and face facts that Zelensky and his regime are murderers. But they're clever, see? They play you. They know the media's on their side. So they play dirty games and then spend the next couple of years wiping the slate clean, acting as if it never happened. Russia's facing attacks from multiple countries, but so far they've confined themselves to Ukraine. And again, they're trying to prolong the war to derail peace talks so that they could sit back and say, oh, Trump's a failure, Putin's a bad guy. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, left-wing voters are never going to turn against the left. And the centrists, they seem to be running around like a chook without their head. They just seem to be going, but both sides. Yeah, all right, so both sides are bad. But what you've got to do in your country is oust the Eurocrats. Because ultimately, right, the Eurocrats, they're padding their wages. They beat the war drums and they pad their wages. Right? You get the secret squirrels and all these committees, right? NATO committees. Committees, every time they sit, they pay themselves big money, right? They stock up on booze and go into 5-star hotels. You watch. There's actually a plane watch that actually tells you about all these women who fly in. You know when it's a conference because there's all of a sudden from around the world, all these planes converge on one city, right? All these private jets full of thoughts and fuckboys. They all converge on, Bern or one. I'm surprised it's Alaska, but okay, it's Alaska. Usually, however, it's not a genuine conference, right? Usually it's NATO, they'll have their summit in London, then they have a summit in Brussels, then they have a summit in Paris, a summit in Berlin. They'll have 5-10 summits every month. The people who care about the environment are, flying 100 plus planes every few days. They spend more on the sidelines than they do on the war. Remember, folks, they're spending more every 3 months than Russia spends a year on this war. You've got to ask yourself, where's all that money going? Well, it ain't going on these lads. Chances are, by next week, one of these are going to be dead. Now, if these was your relatives, are you going to stand there and tell them, chaps, I need you to fight on so I can stay in power? So I can sit back, drink my beer and say, ha-ha, we're weakening Russia. You want to face that reality? That you're putting these men in the ground for your ego. For a man you've never met, who doesn't care about you, and is collecting pretty much half the wage that the US president does, in a country where the average wage is less per year than you get per month. These guys get around $5,600 a year. Now, yeah, they're brave. I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying these men are bad. These men don't have a choice. They don't get a choice. For some of them, that's all they've got. They've got no family. They know once they've left home, their wives are gone. Their children have no future. But they have no choice. Their vote doesn't matter and they know it. And the world, the European capitals, don't care. Once you sign up to the EU, they don't care. All they care about is having you in the EU. That's imperialism, okay? That's the Roman Empire. And they slowly strip away what makes Ukraine. They flood it with foreigners. They start diluting the language. They start diluting the culture down into a theme park. They start holding anti-racism concerts telling you to love your occupiers. They ignore the rape gangs and all the child grooming gangs. Then they'll say, then 20 years later, they say, we made some mistakes. We'll fix it in the future. All they do is string you out with endless promises, right? Hope is the copium and the opium of the ignorant and the low IQ. And they're always highlighting the Vladimir Putin this and Vladimir Putin that. And Europe has made the fucking stupid statement of the entire world, and yet nobody seems to recognise it. That's what they are. They're at the risk of being a footnote in history. Because they're not authorised to speak on the record. But they know they are powerless, and Russia doesn't care what they think about them anymore. Russia said, fuck you. You're going to call us racist? We might as well be racist. You call us all the names under the sun? We might as we'll have nothing to do with you. And now they're panicking. Because this was never about isolating Russia. This was about dominating Russia, giving them a noogie and saying, suck my dick, and I'll let you go. That's what Europe does. Okay? These egotistical cowards. And the problem is that the feminists, they love it. They want power. All of them. All the bootlickers. That's all they do. And then they run around saying, make us a cult, make us a cult, make us a fascists. Yeah, I know. I'm bringing you CNN. I'll wash my mouth out with soap later. But Wickoff had a terrible meeting in Moscow. I don't think they put it down later to a translation mistake. But initially they thought Putin was amenable to giving up some territory. And we'll go through this, right? There are parts where Russia has gone outside the lines, right? You give up all these, we'll say these are the conflicted territories, right? These 4, right? Confine yourself to these 4, right? So, no buffer zone, right? No buffer zone, right? No big build-up and storming into Kiev and stuff like that. No taking Kharkiv. No crossing the line into Mariupol or Kryvyi or going up here. No. But they're doing this to go around the Ukrainians here, right? Flanking the Ukrainians and wearing them down. Though also drawing away their resources from here as well. You know, it's a rather complicated strategy, a balancing act between it's a balancing act between spreading Ukrainians out so that they're weak on the front, but also attacking them on the flanks to draw troops off the front. But at the same time, you've got to take territory. So there are some risks. But it's a balancing act, right? Gosh. So, but Ukraine, these little blue dots, right? But the problem is, and as shown on some media, we zoom out, 1/3, a third, and about a third, you add it up, right? Of the contested areas are still in the hands of Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't want to give these up. But nobody's asking the people what they want. But you can't turn around and say, but what Zelensky's saying is, nah, bro, we won't talk until the Russians are back here. And then you've got to give us all this territory in compensation. You've got to give us all this money in compensation. Then you've got to, this disputed territory here has to become a DMZ and all this other, all these other things that they're talking about now behind the scenes. Then Kiev Independent goes, whoops, we've said too much, and then change it to a just and lasting peace, And Putin has to step down, he has to kiss the ring, they want a historic peace deal signed in Moscow, and Putin apologizes for the war and all this other bullshit. I kid you not, there was actually a list that was published in Ukraine. But many Ukrainians, and I think if you look at the comments in Ukraine on the Ukrainian sites, they are clearly pissed off because they don't know how much of this is real. Because if you're in Sumy, you don't even know what's going up on North. All you know is one day the military comes through town, tells everybody to stay indoors. They've confiscated phones and they've confiscated cameras. There's no movement. People come and go from work, mostly assembling drones. People, now and again, food arrives. There's no economy in Ukraine anymore. There's a black market open, which basically burnt out buildings throughout Ukraine. There's all these stalls where people get goods smuggled in, and people are lining up desperately to get out. Obviously, the goods aren't smuggled in. It's a government corruption, right? Truck arrives somewhere in the middle of the night in a warehouse, and legitimate importers unload and give stuff to to organised crime. I mean, the government. Same thing. There is going to be a reckoning, however, because every day Russia's taking another town And as they stated, every town they take is no step back. So whatever Trump has, I don't know, but he's going to lay it out to Putin on the 15th, US time in Alaska. Until then, there's going to be no public talk about what the pressure is, but they have said quite categorically that they have the key to taking down the Russian economy or building it back up. And they're going to lay it out. But they have also stated that they're not going to accept Zelensky continuing this war. Right? That if they, basically the US are ready to abandon Ukraine completely. See, because the peace deal, the whatever accord you want to call it or whatever, but basically the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine back in the 90s was Ukraine gives up nuclear weapons and becomes neutral. Russia has asked many times to return to the original peace deal. Ukraine says, fuck you. So Russia fucked them. Okay? That's the toxic relationship in a nutshell. Ukraine keeps running behind somebody big so they can feel good about themselves. Europe keeps pushing Russia around because they want to feel good about themselves. That's what happens when the bullied becomes the bullied. They lose all sympathy and empathy for others. That's the left in a nutshell. They virtue signal. They don't have virtue. They're just seeking the approval of others within their echo chamber. Because they're low IQ, because they're lazy, arrogant, and sore losers. They have believed that they're entitled to power because somehow that they can create a miracle utopia. And if you look throughout history, Marx wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. And you get this with some of these false prophets too, particularly the PDF file from Mecca, all promising this wonderful paradise. It's amazing how many paradises are paved in the skulls of others. Whether it's Mussolini and the line of skulls in his ambition. And look, I don't like the guy, but you've got to at least admit, if he never went to war, Italy would have been in a greater position than they were. They had almost no mafia. Mussolini's government would have collapsed without the support from when Germany was defeated. Mussolini's government would have collapsed anyway. Mussolini actually was looking to the West, and had the West basically had some, it's amazing how they wouldn't support Mussolini on principle, but they'll support Zelensky. Guess it has something to do with the length of his nose, right? But that's the thing, isn't it? There are mistakes in the past that they don't want to repeat. So maybe that's why they support Zelensky, because they think, the lesser of two evils, instead of going, let them fight. Which you should have done with, America, Russia, and Japan. Should never abandon Japan. Should have fought communism. But so many people, see, they only want to take the quick way out. They never want to take the road less traveled. They don't want to stop and think. They just want instant gratification. But if you don't take a stand today, your grandchildren won't exist. Feminism is killing the world, folks. They put weak men in power so they can control them. Look at Keir Stammer. Every time he tries to make a decision, he's looking over to his wife. You know it. Look at the President of Ireland. Isn't it, God, can't wait for President Connor, eh? Wouldn't he be a King Connor? Oh, let's make Ireland great again, shall we? But you got to look back and see with clarity. And when you look back in clarity, you go, let's not repeat that mistake. you know? Let's not abandon our allies, but let's not take on allies like Ukraine who just make war. Okay? We can't blame Japan for World War II. That was Jacob Schiff. Cannot blame Germany for World War II. That was Stalin. And until we look back and say, yeah, we shouldn't be punishing Russia today for what Stalin and his cohorts did, because you won't punish America for or the Democrat Party for what they did last week. But let's get rid of, let's start peacefully and stop with this grandfathering of crimes onto the current generation. Because you don't see Africans taking responsibility for anything Africans have done. But they're always willing to pin crimes on everybody else, aren't they? So let's start there. Let's start with something simple. Get rid of the occupiers. Send all the Indians home. Send all the Africans home. You want independence? Granted. There's the road. Hit the pavement. So thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.